Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the KPC podcast. I hope you all had a wonderful spring break. If you had a spring break, I'm Carson Turner.
And I'm Hannah Thurman.
Today, we have a lot that we are going over, and we're going to start with Hannah. She's going to talk about the new tax bill that was passed last week, very briefly.
Just a little brief update on what is going on in our Congress. So the Congress did pass a $1.3 trillion spending package last Wednesday. And so this will fund the government up until the end of this upcoming September. And Trump supports it, obviously. It's about 2,232 pages, which is very long, and no one's going to read it, so no one's going to know what it's going towards. But a little $700 billion of it is going to defense, and $591 billion is for non-defense spending. So this also includes policies that, and this is from CNN, incentivizes state and federal authorities to report more data to the country's gun background check system called FIX, NICS. So that's apparently a really big point of this. People are excited because it does include a background bill, a background check bill, which is important, but also it's a huge bill, which Speaker House Ryan commented on. He said, no bill this size is perfect. We must reform our broken budget process to return to a regular appropriations process. But the legislation addresses important priorities and makes us stronger at home and abroad. And there's people that don't agree with it, and there's people that do, but that will always happen with legislation that goes through. So
I think my personal theory is that it's maybe about 100 pages, and then the rest of it is just the 7 Harry Potter books.
It has to be. It has to be. There's no way, honestly, even if I was a Congress member, I mean, I really want to know what they read. Like, do they really have to read everything? Like, I don't understand.
Yeah, well,
because that's so, I mean, that is crazy.
Yeah, I saw on Twitter that Rand Paul was very much against it. The gist of it from what I understand from the Twitter story from Rand Paul is that it's asking for an obscene amount of money. And since Rand Paul, he's a Republican, and his biggest gripe with it was, if we're conservatives, we're supposed to be conserving money, not asking for a whole bunch. And it's not just us college students who are confused on it. I have this article from MarketWatch.com with the headline, New Tax Laws Stressing Out and Confusing Americans. Yes. And here's a little bit from it. It says, some 42% of taxpayers have no idea if the new law will benefit them. The survey found, but many will see lower tax bills for 2018 through 2025. The new law keeps 7 federal tax brackets, but 6 are at lower rates, according to Bill Bischoff, MarketWatch's tax guy columnist. So according to the tax guy, it's going to benefit some, but a lot of people are just kind of confused on it. They don't quite know. And I think, as we wait, more people are going to pick apart this series.
Someone will go through, will have the job to go through this 2,000-page bill. Yeah,
unfortunately, there's
so
much.
Poor human.
Yeah, before we can have an actual educated comment on it, we need to have someone else pick it apart for us. 'Cause, I mean, we're college students. We have a lot.
I don't have time to read through all that.
Yeah. So something that happened over the weekend was the March for Our Lives. And this was something that I wanted to talk about. This was last Saturday. Now, on the surface, I was kind of hesitant about this march because I feared that it was going to do the same thing that the Women's March did, where they kind of did this blanket statement where they said, this is just about women. We're fighting for women's rights, we're fighting for women's freedom, but we're not going to invite anyone who's pro-life here. And then it kind of made you go, well, hang on, this isn't about women, this is about a specific ideology. This is also what happened with the March for Our Lives. Specific students from Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School were invited to speak. Obviously, Kyle Kashuv was not invited. He attended, and I think he tweeted something that someone attacked him, someone hit him.
You're kidding me.
No, I'm serious. Yeah, he tweeted it. Let me actually see if I can pull it up.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah.
That is just ridiculous.
Yeah. Let's see. Kyle.
Wow. Because, I see on Twitter a lot, of older people will tweet against those that are kind of shaming these Parkland students. Like, I think yesterday there was a photo of Emma Gonzalez ripping the Constitution, but it wasn't
it
real.
wasn't even the Constitution.
Like things like that, and older people are like, "This is unacceptable. How can you do this?" Like people that were at that march shouldn't have done that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm assuming it was someone at that march rather than someone that was against the idea of the march.
Absolutely.
But that is just
bizarre.
Well,
that's my problem with the marches. I don't know
because they are one
they don't
side.
They don't entitle, they follow one ideology, and my biggest criticism of it, I mean, I talk about a couple hypocritical points about it. I mean, for example, let's see, of course, David Hogg, he tweeted something about the march. He said, in a world full of hate and anger, the one thing I think we all need is love and a good hug. And then it's like the other day he got in trouble for being interviewed by the Outline, I think it's the Outline, for saying some pretty foul things. I'm going to pull this up.
I want to listen to this because I did not hear.
Let's see real quick. So here's what he said. Here are just like the highlights of it. This is his interview with the Outline,
Pathetic fuckers that want to keep killing our children.
Which is like, on the surface, sounds pretty nice.
This is about the NRA?
Yeah.
Okay.
They could have blood from children spattered all over their faces and they wouldn't take action because they'll still see those dollar signs.
I think what like really strikes me is that like you guys were obviously doing a lot of work and like a really good job of doing it, but at the same time I'm always in the back of my mind it's like you guys are kids and there are like adults that should be doing.
And I put this clip in because it's like, dude, this woman is so bad at interviewing. How many times did she say like?
That's the interviewee?
Yeah, that's the girl who's interviewing her. So you're like a kid, like, and I looked.
She looks like, I thought she was an older sibling or something, like someone was just recording this interaction. Oh my god!
I looked at her LinkedIn. She went to school at NYU, which has a 30% acceptance rate. It's one of the most prestigious schools in America, and especially for journalism. But she's interviewing. You're like a kid. Like, what do you like? Like, but then he goes on.
Okay.
Like, do you guys ever think like, why the fuck are we the ones who are doing this?
Well, at this point, it's like when your old ass parents like, I don't know how to send an iMessage, and you're just like, give me the fucking phone, and you take it, and you're like, okay, let me handle it, and you get it done in 1 second. Sadly, that's what we have to do with our government because our parents don't know how to use a fucking democracy, so we have to. Yeah,
like when my mom called me and said, how do I turn down the brightness on my phone? I said, give me the effing phone, you don't know how to use an effing democracy. And okay, I'm not against him speaking out like this, but what I don't like is how he kind of does this thing where he'll spew out all this stuff. No problem with him hating the NRA. I don't hate the NRA, but I will admit, they've done a couple things that I disagree with. Mm-hmm. The thing you talked about a couple weeks ago, how they tweeted lobbying, that thing. Lobbying and the, like, we'll take care of our own guns, thank you. And you mentioned something earlier before we started filming. They've done stuff that I disagree with, but I don't think the way to... I think they've both are in this thing where they're just back and forth. I think if they had a sense of maturity, at least... I mean, I feel like if he was just more mature about it, I'd completely take his side. But he is he's talking like a middle schooler, using these awful insults. And one thing that this is one thing that really did get me. He said he's complaining about politicians who aren't taking action. However, here is, this was passed this month. It's called the Stop School Violence Act of 2018 that Kyle Kashuv actually had a big part in helping write. David Hogg had the same opportunity to partake in this bill, but instead he went on Bill Maher's show, bragging about how he got a call from the White House and then was like, I just hung up. And then he's like, no one's taking action, but when the White House tried to call me, I hung up. That's right. It's like, dude, do you not understand how hypocritical that is? Yeah. And it makes it hard. It makes it hard for me to side with him. And I think he makes a bad example for the other students. I disagree with some of the things that Cameron Kasky does, but I really do like him. He actually wants to debate. Him and Kyle Kashuv are friends, and they are setting up a debate, which I think is awesome. That's the biggest thing that this march needed. I think if they had debates on both sides to show that this is a truly divided issue, it would be much more productive. And then he also he makes like Emma Gonzalez look bad too, and I don't think these students represent what David Hogg is personally pressing. Another thing that I thought was funny about the march is that they had a rapper. What's his name?
I did not know they had a rapper.
I have the name somewhere. Let me find it. It made me laugh. Vic Mencia, he was participating. He sang a song about like why we need gun control. But a year ago, he was arrested for carrying a loaded gun in his car without a permit.
Oh, Jesus.
And so I think it just kind of shows that this march suffered from some of the same faults as the Women's March. And again, the lack of inclusivity. I want this gun debate to keep going on. I think it's forced both sides to be much more intelligent with their stances on it. I really didn't care too much about guns before the shooting. And now that it's happened, I feel like the discussion has been, it keeps going. We talk about this almost every podcast, which I like because we have to keep looking in and we alter our stances.
Because there's always something new, too.
Yeah.
There's always something new.
But I think it really does genuinely disappoint me when David Hogg will take a turn and just look at the other side and says, oh, these politicians, they want to murder children. Everyone knows, every sensible person knows it's not true. But there is, I understand where he's coming from. He's trying to make the point that these politicians would rather take money from the NRA, but that's a whole nother argument. He could have said that instead of saying they're going to kill kids. But
yeah, I think that he is coming out of that. I think all these kids that are, in front of this, they haven't, not that I think they've voiced that they don't need to take a break and heal and sit back and relax, but they really, I don't think they've had time to heal, and I think that he seems to be, and he has every right to be, extremely angry,
right,
and I think all that anger and then that PTSD from that event really, when he sees that things aren't changing, I think that that's where you can tell that he's so affected by it, because he's so passionate. And I mean, I agree with you. I think that there could be so many better ways to handle this, but they're still young, and they've been through something that I don't want to imagine going through. But
I think there are certain ways to handle stressful situations. For example, I think for one, he needs to take a break. Obviously, he's stressed out. Like you said, he's been through a lot. I think he should listen to some of the criticism that people put on him. And I think all the students, even though they've gone through this, I read this piece a couple weeks ago in the National Review saying that the kids speaking out, they're still fair game to criticism. And the author, I don't know if it was the author, but someone mentioned that, I've been doing journalism since I was 16. And the moment I started writing, the first comments I received was, you're an idiot, you're only 16. So it's like, I think they are fair to be criticized. I don't think you should be saying anything hateful. I don't know these people. I don't hate them. But I am trying to point out the flaws and in an attempt to steer them in the right direction. But I honestly do think that they need to kick back and relax and just kind of go back into reality for a little bit before stepping back into it. Because obviously they've been through a lot, whether they were...
and it's being in the limelight, I'm sure, is not easy.
Absolutely.
I have no words to, because you want to add on to, I can't imagine this and blah blah blah, but we really, I have no idea. We have no idea what's going through them.
I just hope that this debate can take a turn for the better, and I think there are signs of it.
I really hope so.
And
it's definitely, this debate's been lasting way longer than
which
the
is
others.
Great. Yeah.
So that's exciting, I guess.
Yeah, the Stop School Violence Act of 2018, I highlighted a couple things. So what it basically is, it says that there's $50 million going to be appropriated a year for schools to develop threat assessment systems. It's also going to technology to increase it says personnel, I'm assuming things like bodyguards and metal detectors. It says none of this money in the bill would be used to arm teachers, which was a highly controversial topic. And so I think this is a step in the right direction. I just wish David Hogg would have used his platform to go towards legislation, because David was in the same position as Kyle, and he chose the legislative route, and he's had a say in it, but David chose the exact opposite. And I
think the reason why these kids are doing that instead of this is because they want big. They want the biggest they can get, and they're not going to settle. But it's not going to happen that way. It's going to happen with things like that, little baby steps. This country is so divided on this that there's no chance that we're going to jump from being so divided to outlawing guns and all this legislation. It's not going to happen. It's not realistic at all. And so those little steps, you can pass these bills that will protect, and then years down the road, if another shooting happens, but it was more spanned out, you can say, hey, look, the things that we have passed are benefiting
We're not
us.
done yet, but we still
so let's keep going. Let's see what else we can improve on, rather than completely hoping for the most, which we're not going to get.
Yeah. And I think that's just how everything works. And I've actually read a couple headlines talking about this, saying that school shootings have been on the decline in the past 20 years. So I think we are taking more necessary steps in the right direction. But I don't know. I think it is the balance of both the activists and then the lawmakers themselves. But one thing that I thought was kind of hypocritical about him too is like I said, he mentions that politicians don't want to talk about it, but Marco Rubio had no problem going to the CNN town hall meeting. He knew what he was getting into. Everyone just bashed Rubio, and then David has just ignored Kyle on Twitter. I've seen Kyle tweet at him multiple times, being like, "Well, you want to debate? You want to?" I think one tweet he said. David said, like, I've got a few minutes, ask me anything. And then so Kyle tweeted at him, he's like, you want to debate? No response. So I think there's a little bit of hypocrisy. I think David might know that he's in the wrong on a couple of the things that he said, because that's why he's afraid to debate Kyle, because Kyle's a really smart kid. And I don't know. I think Cameron Kasky is a much better representative.
I do like him. I like him.
Especially since he's willing to actually debate with Kyle. And that's kind of something that we need. Two students with different views talking about how we can actually solve this problem. And the fact that they're both high schoolers, too, has me really excited. So, yeah, that was a long story. And I've got, like, 2 other long stories. This is going to be a long episode,
Let's keep
which
it
is
going.
good. Yeah.
I didn't give my quote on the NRA.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, okay, so this is from CNN, or Fox News, just kidding. So as I was going through gathering some stuff on this headline from Fox News kind of caught my attention. Big Hollywood-backed stage student-inspired gun safety march. So I read it, completely different viewpoint of something that you'd find on CNN. It literally just talks about all the money that these celebrities are putting in, and then it talks about Oprah Winfrey giving to Obama's campaigns. Like, that doesn't even have to do with the march. But one thing that really was shocking was the NRA said something on Facebook on Saturday after the protests, and this is the quote from them: today's protests aren't spontaneous. Gun-hating billionaires and Hollywood elites are manipulating and exploiting children as part of their plan to destroy the Second Amendment and strip us of our right to defend ourselves and our loved ones. Which is just, the NRA, in my viewpoint, I'm starting to dislike it even more, because they just keep tweeting things that are, saying that they're manipulating and exploiting children as a part to destroy their Second Amendment. The kids are the ones that started this March for Our Lives. They initiated it. It wasn't the famous people. George Clooney and whoever else was there support the cause, so they're going to go and they're going to give money to it to make it bigger, because they can do that, and that's their decision. That's not manipulating them, and that's not exploiting the children.
Right.
And I think it's the right, really strong people on the right hate Hollywood and everything, and I get that, because Hollywood really isn't great. They don't do a lot of great things within itself, but this isn't. It's kind of ironic, because to me they're saying they're kind of the ones that are attacking the kids, saying like, this is the kids' idea to destroy the Second Amendment. But
I do believe that these kids, I think obviously they're making money off of this, but they didn't start because they wanted to make money. They started because it was what they believe in. And that's also why I think it's very ironic that the NRA says these kids, they're exploiting, or Hollywood's exploiting children. These children are getting rich off of this cause. But then a lot of politicians, they're doing the same thing. And
exactly. Like, hello. You're giving money to politicians.
And that's why one of my criticisms of these children has never been, well, they're doing it for money. Because it's like, obviously they're going to get money for supporting a rich ideology, because our politicians do the same exact thing. Whether it's a good cause or not, that's up to the person. But I'm never going to say that they sold out, because their initial reaction to the shooting wasn't, I'm actually pro-gun. And then CNN was like, hey, here's $100. And they're like, I hate guns.
Right, exactly.
So I don't know. I don't like that hypocrisy. And like I said, I don't hate the NRA, but I've been very disappointed in some of the actions that they've been taking. I think they've been almost as immature as David Hogg, and I don't like seeing that. It's almost like, whenever Trump first became president, it's still kind of a thing now, but it was worse back whenever he was first elected. Him and the media would just always go at it. But instead of one of them stepping up to be the bigger person, they both just became the smaller person. And it was just so cringy to see our media, which we were supposed to respect, fall so low. And I mean, that's like the whole Stormy Daniels thing, which I think you have. Do you have a story?
No,
okay,
that was just on like how we were talking earlier, how I don't even remember what we were talking about.
Yeah, Stormy Daniels was interviewed. And
so all this stuff with her is kind of, I mean, people are going to pay attention to that more so than the 2,000 page bill that was just passed.
But I also think it's like looking into our president's sex life is such a weird, almost low blow.
I don't want to know about it.
Yeah,
I don't want that image in my head about with Donald Trump. No, thank you.
Yeah, and I think the media has a lot of branches have a lot of growing up to do. We have a very immature modern media. I'm trying to also find this tweet where Kyle said someone hit him, but he tweets a lot throughout the day. So
we'll find it.
Yeah, I'll eventually find it. I'll have it up on the screen. But so did you have whose turn is it now?
Yours with the journalist activist thing?
That is the last thing I'll talk about. I have two more stories before that. So the first thing I wanted to talk about, so there's been this kind of trend of taking down historical statues in America. I think it's been happening for the past year or so. In February, the state of California voted to remove a statue of Christopher Columbus because they didn't see it as a statue-worthy statue, I guess, which is interesting to note because the same thing happened in the 1920s. The KKK were, this is more of a history lesson type thing. The KKK wanted Christopher Columbus's statue to be taken down because they didn't want an Italian being representative of America because he wasn't white, which I thought was really interesting. But I watched this video today, a report from historian Michael Knowles. He did a video on Christopher Columbus talking about how a lot of the things that happen, or he's been greatly misrepresented in today's media, because now when we hear Christopher Columbus, we think, oh my God, this tyrant, this terrible person. There's no doubt that people back then did terrible things. But if you look at it in the context of the times were different, and I'll read some of this so it looks, to give it more sense. So where did I start this? Okay, so okay, there are numerous instances of people wanting to take down Columbus's statue because he's a murdering tyrant, when in reality, the anti-Columbus people, they got a lot of their information from the writing of this person named Francisco Bobadilla, which was Columbus's political rival. So that's kind of like if we got all of our information from Hillary Clinton, from Donald Trump. So a lot of this came from Columbus's political rival. And then here's a couple other things about it. It says, God, I'm going to butcher these names. This guy named Bartolome de las Casas, he's one of the biggest defenders of the natives. Once Columbus's ship settled in North America, there was one guy who I just mentioned. He was very adamant about, let's not mess with these Native Americans. It's their land. We need to respect it. We can integrate within. We're not going to do anything violent. He was a huge supporter of Christopher Columbus and admired the fact that Columbus was not walking in, killing Indians. And another thing, too, is that Christopher Columbus wrote this long thing about how another settlement was going out and using young women as sexual currency, and he was very much against that, even though it was kind of normalized for the time, if that kind of makes sense. And then there's this historian at the University of Stanford, her name is Carol Delaney. She points out that the evil done to the Native Americans, all of that came after Columbus, and that he's being vastly misrepresented, which, of course, there's a very credible argument to be made that he started the train. He didn't do it directly, but he indirectly caused the killings of Native Americans, and that's a fair argument. But I don't think it's fair to say that Christopher Columbus is the sole person responsible for killing all these Native Americans. And I thought that was so interesting that people view him as a demon, but in reality, it wasn't him directly doing all these evil things. And I thought that was interesting, to say the least. Like I said, I know he has done bad things, but his overall representation has been skewed to make him look worse than he actually is, which this all kind of ties into today's story because students at the Hofstra University are demanding the removal of a Thomas Jefferson statue from campus because Jefferson owned slaves and has been embraced as an icon by white supremacists.
I was wondering if this is where the story was going
Yes.
because I did see this headline today. But I don't know much about it, so take it away.
Drink some water. Then.
It caught my eye, and I think everybody in that age owned slaves for the most part, and
well, that's kind of my thing. It's like, if we're gonna get rid of Thomas Jefferson, should we get rid of George Washington? Could we get rid of more of our founding fathers that I can't name right now because it's been a long day? So here's what some of the article says. It says, Jeloni Amor, a student at the University of Hofstra and a Black Lives Matter activist, released a petition calling for the statue's removal on March 17th. This is kind of funny. Proclaiming that Jefferson has been embraced as an icon by white supremacists and neo-Nazi organizations like the Ku Klux Klan, Ku Klux Klan and neo-Nazis are from like the 2000s. That's like Nazis after World War II. I know the KKK is still around today, but they weren't buddies back in the day, and they weren't even a thing when Thomas Jefferson was alive.
Yeah.
I think Thomas Jefferson is a hero to the American people. Now, I think when it comes to these historical figures, you should section off what you like and what you dislike about him. For example, I think Martin Luther King Jr. is a huge hero to the civil rights movement. I know that he subscribed to some communist political belief systems, which communism is a government that killed hundreds of millions of people. I don't look at Martin Luther King Jr. and say, what a communist, he's terrible. I look at him for the good that he's done. And though I understand he subscribed to some bad ideas, I don't think he was overall a bad person. Same thing with Thomas Jefferson, which interestingly enough, it said something about he had raped his slaves, which is absolutely not true. There's a story that he had a relationship with one of his slaves and he had children with her, but historians can't quite piece together whether or not they were in love, and the person writing this petition just assumed that he was raping her. That's still a possibility, but we don't actually know, so I don't think you should just
assume.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, I just think it's really interesting that people want to be censoring historical figures, especially someone like Thomas Jefferson, because, I mean, it's because of his writings. It's the reason we have our First Amendment, the freedom of speech, which the student is utilizing. She has the gift of the First Amendment to take him down. And I just thought that was kind of funny.
I think I can get behind the removal of certain statues that...
like the Confederate.
Right.
Yeah,
things like that.
Sense.
That makes sense. But it's Thomas Jefferson. I mean,
He's
he was a founding father.
Yeah.
He did so much for this country. And I hate to say it, but having slaves in that time was the quote unquote norm.
Right.
And now we look at it and say, that's terrible. How could we ever think that was okay? And now that's the norm now, that obviously we think that's terrible.
Yeah.
But just because we see things differently than they did back then doesn't mean that we should denounce everything that he's done for us.
And he wasn't famous for owning slaves. He was famous for establishing our country. And I think another thing, like I said, it's because of his writings we're able to criticize him for being a slave owner, or we were able to criticize the idea of slavery as a whole. So I think that's a much bolder move for him to partake in something where I think the founding fathers knew, like, oh, I think in 200 years they're going to look at some of the stuff we said and did and think it's absolutely insane, when they could have said, actually, we're going to write in the Constitution that no one can criticize our government or we're going to kill them. You know, like some countries where if you criticize their government or religion, you're punished by death. Right. So I just think it's all just a weird sense of irony that really shouldn't be existing. I think people look too hard to get offended at things, and that's further stated in my next story, which, do you have another story, or will I
don't,
just... Okay,
but
so...
I do have somewhere to be at 5:45, so...
Oh, okay.
We should do your favorite one.
Should we save that one for Friday then?
Yeah, that's what kind of what I was thinking.
I think this podcast has gone... We've had a very long episode, but thanks for tuning in, everyone who did. Do you have anything else to say, or will that be it?
I don't. So on Friday, we'll be talking about, you read an article on journalists being activists.
Yes. And I also read another article about the state of the First Amendment in Britain. A man is going to jail for a year because of a joke he made online.
Oh, boy.
So, yeah, be sure to stay tuned for that on Friday. That's all for us for today's episode of the KPC podcast. I'm Carson Turner.
And I'm Hannah Thurman.
We will catch you guys on Friday.
Woo woo.